Thank you, Sue. Hello, everybody. Um, as Sue said, my name is Phyllis Macfarlane. I'm a lifelong market researcher. If you cut me in half, it will be written all the way through me like Brighton Rock. Been an MD of a agency in the UK, but as Sue said, for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been developing education programs in emerging markets, both on behalf of the GfK Verein and for the ESOMAR Foundation. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my experience and how as market researchers we need to develop our skills in developing markets, because market research can be different there. And I'm going to look at it from, if you like, both sides of the coin, because you have to understand that as a researcher from a developed market, you need to understand how to commission and manage good quality market research and to avoid cultural pitfalls, which can be quite disastrous. I mean, we all laugh about 20 or 30 years ago, people trying to do research on alcohol in countries where alcohol was forbidden. But there's still plenty of other cultural pitfalls that you can fall into, believe you me. And on the other hand, as a researcher in a developing market, you need to be able to handle international clients and do good work for them, and you need to be growing your local client base. You cannot live on international clients alone. I'm going to go through what I see as some of the key differences between research in developing markets and research in developed markets. Now, first of all, let's start with sampling right at the beginning. One of the things you should be aware of is that the concept national representative sampling can be very variable. It may not cover all geography or all social classes in developing markets. You need to check assumptions where sampling is concerned. And if you're in a developing market, if you're a researcher there, be aware that clients from developed markets have less and less experience of the sort of face-to-face sampling that you do. So we may not really understand the issues that you come up with. So if you're an international researcher at all, I do urge you to get hold of a copy of the ESOMAR Global Prices Study, because there's some very interesting things in that. And one of the things is we asked agencies what they assume by a nationally representative sample when they quote for it, and it can be quota, it can be random, it can just be urban areas, it can have different lower age limits or different upper age limits. You just need to be aware of that. The upper age limit might not be a problem, because in developing markets the population does tend to be younger, but still you need to be aware. And I borrowed this next slide unashamedly from Ray Pointer, who's the author of the Global Prices Study, and I particularly like his first thing, which I'd never seen before, that assume makes an ass of and me. Assumptions are the bane of international research. So always get your supplier to write in their own words, especially about the sample, what they propose to do, and especially about who will not be included in the research, because you'll then be much clearer about what you have to deal with in that matter. Second key difference is fieldwork. In developing markets, it's still done mainly face. And you should be aware that quality can be variable for both qual and quant fieldwork. Interviewers in general are not well trained, and they're certainly not well paid. Some may subcontract to friends, they may have other businesses, cheating may occur. Always insist that a good personal briefing is given to interviewers by someone who understands the project fully, and include training on any difficult aspects of the project. I have to say, even though in the last 3 or 4 years things have vastly improved, because I think high proportions now of face-to-face interviewing is done using mobile phones as CAPI devices, but don't think that that always means a smartphone. Quite often basic feature phones are used, and they're not ideal actually as a CAPI device. So be sure that all the stated quality processes are actually followed. and especially with group discussions, do check that respondents qualify. And that's probably true all over the world anyway, so perhaps don't need to have to say that. And one thing, I won't spend a lot of time on this chart, but do get the Global Prices Study Report, because within that, all prices for standard jobs like Q&As and focus group discussions are indexed, and a global median is calculated, and every country is given an overall index. So it's very helpful in knowing what sort of prices you should be paying in different countries, or doing an estimate of an international job without actually getting quotes. I do urge you to get onto that. The third key difference is social classification. You probably don't think about it in a developed market, but it is different in developing market, because it's not necessarily based on your job as it is in developed markets. People very often have multiple jobs in emerging markets, or they may live at subsistence level. You need to understand what the industry used locally. In Africa, for example, special methods called LSMs, or lifestyle measures, based on the ownership of products have been developed. And often it's useful to have both in the questionnaire, so that you have the questionnaire, the analysis flexibility for both local clients and to add to other international jobs. Language and communications. Check what languages the questionnaire is translated to. Some countries have 30 or 40 languages, and certainly several multiple language. Everyone is multilingual. They're often telling me that I will be considered illiterate soon because I only speak English, which I'm quite often ashamed of when I realise how many languages other people speak. So check what happens. Sometimes it's left to interviewers to translate into local languages, and meanings might be changed because some local languages don't have the flexibility of words that we have in English or European languages. So, for example, in Kenya, strength and power are actually the same word in one of the local languages. So you can't be very subtle when you're distinguishing between these things. And in Rwanda, a lot of their business language doesn't have a lot of subtlety. So one thing you can be sure of is that both sides will misunderstand and be misunderstood. It is inevitable, but be disciplined, write everything down clearly, and always check, check, and check again. But I think that the issue about language is important, because your beautifully subtle questionnaire may get twisted in with the meanings not quite being as beautiful as you hoped they were. I always advise researchers in developed markets to do some qualitative work if they haven't worked in the country before. We all make assumptions, and you will make mistakes if you don't take the trouble to understand the culture. I can guarantee it. Timing and responsiveness. Now, we all know market research is a very complicated business. It always amazes me how things do work, actually. But things can go wrong everywhere, but they're more likely to in developing markets where the infrastructure is less established, especially outside major cities. And the concept of process is less developed in emerging markets. There's less contingency planning. They don't have such a strong concept of Plan B as we do it. I'm sure you've heard the expression TIA, this is Africa, when people shrug their shoulders and say, well, these things happen here. You can't expect anything different. And be aware that there may not be clear structures if someone's ill or called away, and that can happen. In developing markets, people have very strong family structures, and they have responsibilities. So make sure you know the team and who will take over if anything should happen in that regard. Working cultures may be different. In general, society in developing markets is more hierarchical than it is in developed markets. Researchers are not encouraged to challenge clients. I've asked students why didn't they challenge a brief, and they said, oh, we didn't know we were supposed to, we didn't know we were allowed to. They're also not encouraged to develop themselves too much in case they expect more money or move on. And nor do clients really expect an agency to tell them what to do and give them business advice. And they don't have the same high-level sophisticated PowerPoint presentations that is the norm in the US and Europe these days. So just be aware of that. But from the other point of view, if you're a researcher in a developing market, be aware that European and US agencies tend to be very large, very organized, and very process-driven, and tend not to be aware of the issues you face in your country or knowledgeable about the techniques used always. The example I would give is that because we don't do face-to-face interviewing in the developed markets so much anymore, very few younger researchers understand the selection of individuals in a household using a Kish grid. We've got it on the bottom there so you can Google it. I'm not going to explain what it is, but it is more sophisticated than sampling from an online panel, and you might find as a researcher in a developing market that we don't understand some of the things that you have to do to get good samples. We're very demanding of process and technology and timing without necessarily understanding your problems. So I would say if you're in a developing market and you're a researcher, do amend your culture a little bit for the new world of MR, especially challenge the brief, especially if it asks for things that aren't appropriate in your country. Make sure you understand, show your local knowledge and experience. Don't assume that the client knows, and do learn to give advice. Read up on everything. Build your MR skills. The world of market research is changing so fast. Don't assume that new techniques won't get to you soon. Be prepared. Listen to webinars like this, read papers, watch presentations, especially about new techniques, and keep thinking, how would that work here? You're going to leapfrog some areas of development. Be prepared. I have interns who come to the UK and they sit in our digital department and they say, oh, Phyllis, you know, this is never going to happen at home. And then a week or two later they say, you know, I think it will sooner than we thought. It's a very useful thing to bear in mind. And build your general skills, your general management and marketing skills. It's no longer a niche business. We compete with management consultants. No longer about much surveys. We have to understand the world of business and marketing in the broadest sense. If you can, find yourself a mentor. Advice from another point of view are always useful, and people are much more willing to help than you would assume. Everybody in ESOMAR, I would say, would help you if you only ask. And always think entrepreneurially, because there are so many opportunities in market research. It's a great industry to be in, and one of the things that does worry me about developing markets is that local clients don't do so much market research. So much of the spend comes from international clients. You need to constantly promote the value and use of market research, preferably through your local market or research association, or just do it yourself. Offer to lecture at the local university. It's good experience anyway. And remember, research these days doesn't have to be expensive, and every business does need evidence for decision making. So, in summary, we live in a world where skills constantly need to be updated. Keep up and think how they can be applied in your market. Never make assumptions until you know how a country works. It's all too easy to get it wrong from both ways. Quality must be your passion. Don't get stuck in a niche. You need to understand how business and marketing work generally. And I do urge you, make it a personal responsibility to promote the value of market research amongst local businesses. So, if you have been listening, as they say on the BBC, thank you very much. And I hope to answer your questions later on. Thank you.